After a long week of waiting, episode 3 of The Last of Us is finally here. After the last brutal zombie invasion, the survivor town faces an even greater threat. No more talk. Let's dive straight into the story. Following the fierce battle, the town of Jackson is filled with the bitter smell of smoke and ashes. Joel's body has been recovered and brought back to town. His brother, Tommy, finishes up his work with heavy steps and makes his way to the morgue. Staring at the watch Joel cherished most, Tommy feels a sharp sting in his chest. Who could have imagined that after just one day apart, the two brothers would be separated forever? Ellie, too, is struggling to accept reality. She wakes up from a coma, and the first thing that floods her mind is the memory of Joel's death. Time jumps forward 3 months, once again showing its power to heal, at least on the surface. Jackson gradually returns to its former prosperity. The city walls have been rebuilt even stronger, and Tommy has finally found his smile again. Today marks the day Ellie is officially discharged from the hospital. Physically, her wounds healed long ago. The real reason she stayed this long was because she hadn't received the psychologist's approval to leave. Everyone knew Joel's death hit Ellie the hardest. But looking at her now, she seems almost like nothing ever happened. The therapist intentionally brings up old memories, the argument during the New Year's Eve party, which turned out to be Ellie and Joel's final conversation. It feels like a knife twisting in Ellie's chest, but she forces herself to speak in a calm, steady voice. No matter what happened, she says, the only thing I can do now is let myself move on. Her response clearly satisfies the therapist, and finally, Ellie is cleared to leave the hospital, just like she's been hoping. The moment she steps out of the hospital room, the calm mask she's been wearing cracks. She heads straight to Joel's old place. At the door, a basket of flowers catches her eye, a silent testament to just how many people Joel had helped when he was alive. Summoning her courage, Ellie walks inside. Everything is exactly the way Joel left it, yet somehow, it all feels painfully unfamiliar. On the bed sits a bright red box, impossible to miss. It's the box Tommy packed with Joel's belongings. Inside, she finds his old watch and the handgun he always carried. Without hesitation, Ellie tucks the gun into her waistband. As she turns toward the closet and spots Joel's familiar jacket hanging there, the dam finally breaks. Tears stream down her face, unstoppable. Just then, there's a knock at the door. Ellie quickly wipes her tears away. It's her best friend, Dina. Hearing that Ellie had been hospitalized, Dina brought over a box of homemade cookies, part celebration, part apology. Because during Ellie's time in the hospital, Dina had been hiding something from her, the truth that she actually knew who killed Joel. At the time, Dina had kept it to herself, worried that Ellie might rip out her four and run off to get revenge. Ellie stays remarkably calm. After all, if anyone truly knows her, it's Dina. Finally, Dina reveals what she knows. The woman who killed Joel is named Abby, and she's part of a group called the Washington Liberation Front, or WLF for short, based in Seattle. Dina remembers spotting a wolf insignia on a backpack once. It must have been the group's emblem. She also recalls Eugene mentioning that the Fireflies once tried to form alliances with smaller groups from all over, including the WLF in Seattle. So chances are, the group isn't that big. Hearing all this, the fire of revenge burns hotter than ever inside Ellie. Without wasting a second, she goes straight to Tommy, hoping to convince him to head to Seattle with her. But Jackson was still in the middle of rebuilding, and Tommy, as a council member, simply couldn't just leave. Instead, he pointed Ellie toward a different path: submit her revenge plan to the town council. If it passed, they'd organize a proper team to head to Seattle. For Ellie, avenging Joel had already become an obsession. She knew she had to get herself back to peak form as soon as possible. She went to Jesse, the head of the patrol squads, and also a council member, hoping he could pull some strings. But Jesse explained that the council needed to listen to the residents' opinions before making any decisions. All Ellie could do was organize her thoughts carefully and prepare to present them to everyone the next day. Early the next morning, the town hall was packed with people. When the topic of sending a combat team to avenge Joel came up, many residents stood up to share their views. Some worried that sending people away would leave Jackson too vulnerable. If the infected attacked again, how would they defend themselves? Others started preaching about morality, arguing that they shouldn't sink to the level of raiders by seeking blood for blood. Ellie sat there listening, her frown deepening with every word. At that moment, the town's old chef cut off everyone's debates. He slammed his fist down, furious, and said what many were thinking. These people had come specifically to kill Joel. That kind of attack was even worse than an infected outbreak. If they didn't pick up their weapons and make the murderers pay, those killers would just come back again. Ellie couldn't help but feel a wave of satisfaction hearing that. When it was finally her turn to speak, Ellie pulled out her handwritten notes, taking a deep breath. She made it clear that her proposal wasn't about personal revenge. It was about fighting for justice. If everyone just stood by and watched their loved ones get slaughtered without doing anything, then the bonds holding Jackson together would eventually crumble. Her words struck a chord. The crowd started nodding along, clearly moved. Still, it would all come down to the final vote. Ellie's heart was pounding, terrified she might miss even a single vote in her favor. But in the end, the result was a huge disappointment. Only 3 votes for, 8 against. The proposal was rejected. Up on the stage, Tommy gave Ellie a worried glance. After the meeting adjourned, he immediately went to find the town's psychologist. After all, aside from the late Joel, there probably wasn't anyone in Jackson who understood Ellie better. Tommy was seriously worried that Ellie wouldn't be able to handle the result, that she might go off and do something reckless. The town's psychologist, however, was sure of it. She said Ellie was definitely going to act. All that stuff Ellie said at the meeting about not being driven by hate, that was just to fool everyone. The doctor's assessment cut straight to the core. Ellie was a natural-born liar, hiding a raging beast inside her. In her opinion, Ellie was beyond saving. Meanwhile, Ellie was back in her room, silently packing her gear. She was getting ready to leave Jackson and avenge Joel on her own. Just as she was finishing up, there was a knock at the door. It was Dina. Ellie knew there was no way to hide her intentions from her best friend, so with a heavy heart, she opened the door. What she didn't expect was that Dina had already made her own preparations. The road to Seattle wouldn't be easy. They'd have to skirt around major cities and cut straight through national parks. But Dina had it all mapped out. She even put together a detailed checklist of everything they'd need: heavy-duty weapons, outdoor gear like boots and tents, and more. From the look of things, Dina was fully committed to going with Ellie on this revenge mission. Ellie was both touched and stressed. Gathering all that gear sounded like a massive problem. But Dina just smiled mysteriously and told her not to worry. She said, "Meet me at the East Gate at 3 a.m. You'll see." Before she knew it, it was time. At the East Gate, Ellie spotted Dina leading a horse loaded with supplies, all generously provided by the old cook. On top of that, he even gave Ellie a high-powered sniper rifle to take with her. If it weren't for the injury to his leg, he said, he would have ridden with them himself to help avenge Joel. And so, with the old cook escorting them to the edge of town, Ellie and Dina set off on horseback, heading out on their path of vengeance. Before leaving Jackson behind, Ellie made one last stop, Joel's grave. She knelt down slowly, silently vowing that no matter what it took, she would find Abby and make her pay. Just like a few years ago, when Abby had sworn at her own father's grave that she would kill Joel. 2 people, once total strangers, now locked in a cycle of hate that had made them bitter enemies. Thanks to the route Dina had carefully mapped out, they managed to avoid the big cities where infected swarmed. The journey so far went surprisingly smoothly. You had to hand it to Dina. She had thought of everything, from waterproof tents to cooking gear. There wasn't a single thing missing. Just as Ellie and Dina were nearing Seattle, they had no idea what was happening not too far away. On a forest trail ahead, a bald man wearing a jacket with a fish emblem cautiously scanned his surroundings. Once he confirmed everything was clear, he whistled sharply toward the front. Hearing the signal, the rest of his group, hidden farther down the trail, finally relaxed a little. It turned out they were refugees, driven from their homeland by a local organization's persecution. They had been wandering, desperate to find a new place to settle. But suddenly, loud shouting echoed from behind them. In an instant, every member of the group paled in fear and scattered into the woods. A little girl was left lying face down on the ground, trembling uncontrollably.
Demons?
Wolf.
No one knew how much time passed after that. Ellie and Dina soon arrived at the forest trail, only to stumble upon the body of the bald whistler. He had been shot 5 or 6 times in the back, shell casings of all calibers scattered across the ground. Before Ellie could react, Dina burst out from the woods, vomiting uncontrollably. Ellie rushed in to check what was wrong and froze at the sight. The clearing was littered with corpses, the same refugees they had just glimpsed moments ago. Even the small girl hadn't survived. Ellie guessed it had to be the work of Abby's group, the Washington Liberation Front. If there had been any doubt before, it was gone now. Seeing the sheer brutality of it all only hardened their resolve. Abby and her people had to be stopped. They were already getting close to downtown Seattle now, with abandoned, rusted cars and debris scattered everywhere. Following the narrow forest path, Ellie and Dina pushed forward, but the scene that greeted them made them stop in their tracks. Under the gloomy sky, vines like giant snakes twisted around crumbling skyscrapers. The entire city looked like the hollowed-out skeleton of some once great beast. Yet, to Ellie, there was a strange kind of beauty to it. The two girls turned their horses and headed toward the city center, unaware that they were already being watched. At the top of one of the taller buildings, a man kept careful surveillance of the surroundings. He wasn't just anyone. He was one of the men who had helped Abby murder Joel. After confirming over the radio that everything looked clear, a convoy of armored vehicles rumbled onto the streets from the distance, accompanied by a large number of heavily armed Liberation Front soldiers. At a glance, it was obvious. This was no small ragtag group. The Washington Liberation Front had enough strength to rival Jackson itself. If Ellie and Dina had known just how powerful Abby's organization was, they would have thought twice about charging in alone. Honestly, even if Jackson had sent a full strike team, it might not have been enough to take them down, and could have brought even bigger trouble on their heads.